Hey Websters, Mr. Lassiter with you, and we're getting to the last part of chapter 17 in our book having to do with colonial expansion and conflict. Of course, we've been talking about the colonies of Spain, Portugal in Brazil, and England in the Americas, as well as the French in the Americas. And where last we left off, the French had just lost a bunch of their land. As they had been trying to expand, that led to conflict with the British, and the British win that war, the French and Indian War. So that's a good example of colonial expansion and conflict. What else are we going to learn about Mr. Lassiter? Let's find out. So here we go. At the end of the 1600s, we see European colonies starting to expand economically and demographically, meaning that they're expanding their economies, their reach of trade, their production of cash crops, their interactions with the old world and the new, and then of course they're expanding demographically. We see an expansion of the number of people coming to the Americas for opportunity. So what does this mean? Well, that means there's a lot of people and a lot of money at risk here. So imperial powers start to respond with more control over these colonies and a desire for more taxes, because as more and more people move over and we see more and more expansion and more conflict, the home countries of these people, either France or Spain or Portugal or England, they have to pay for the defense of these colonies. And so they're going to see the colonies themselves as sources of this money. We also see several wars fought, as I mentioned, the French and Indian War being one of these that is fought between imperial powers. Over this time, we're going to see that colonists become more aware also of their separate identities, and they begin to be more concerned with their local interests than those of the crown. It's these types of things that are combined with the ideas of the Enlightenment and things of that nature, religious tolerance, which will lead to the creation of the United States and many of the things that the United States held dear. But nevertheless, this is not U.S. history. Talk to Mr. Drake about that. So let's go to Imperial Reform in Spanish America. So talking about New Spain here. After 1713, Spain's new dynasty, the Bourbon dynasty, undertook a series of administrative reforms. Basically, they expanded intercolonial trade. They granted new commercial monopolies on certain goods. They produced a stronger navy, and they decided to better police the trade in contraband goods to the Spanish colonies, basically trying to cut out any illicit trade, any bootlegging, what have you. There's a better word for that. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Anyways, these reforms coincided with 18th century economic expansion. And we see that agriculture expansion in places like Cuba, South America, Rio de la Plata, Venezuela, Chile, and then of course Central America. So as we see economic expansion, making more money, the crown basically is going to try to exert more and more control, of course, to make more money and be in control of who is making the money. So what were the results? Well, really we see that these policies actually are detrimental to the interests of people in the colonies, whereas they might be making money for one. If you have to trade with the people who have the monopoly on your crop, for example, you may not make as much money because there's not as much competition. So these policies were detrimental to the economies, which had been linked to illegitimate trade with other people besides the Spanish, the English, the French, and the Dutch. The new monopolies that came about and were granted during this time aroused opposition from Creole elites. Remember Creoles, who were those people the Spanish who were born in the New World. So the only gain really these elites had from the reforms was that they got to lead militias, and that was basically it. And that was supposed to counter the threat of the war with England, but overall they are losing out on money, which is what everybody really cares about. Anyways, these Bourbon policies were also a factor in Native American uprisings, including one led by the Peruvian Amerindian leader Tupac Amaru II. Jose Gabriel Condorcanqui. And that's him pictured on the right of your screen. Basically, these harsh policies cracking down lead to rebellion. But this rebellion is suppressed eventually after more than 2 years, and it cost the Spanish colonies over 100,000 lives, enormous amounts of property damage. But eventually, that rebellion is stopped. So, take it for what it's worth. Reform in Brazil. Brazil also undergoes a period of economic expansion and administrative reform in the 1700s. Basically, we kind of mentioned this a while back as Brazil expanded. In your video a couple days ago, I mentioned that they decided to establish or appoint a viceroy for Portugal, and that was to try to, or for Brazil, excuse me, and that was the Portuguese trying to get more control of this region in the 1700s. Anyways, they expanded their control over trade, established monopolies, same kind of thing we see in Spain, and the gold, diamonds, coffee, and cotton, which are the major money-making things, paid for the importation of nearly 2 million African slaves and fueled a new wave of imports, especially from Britain. Some rebellions occur in Brazil. There is open warfare in 1707 between this group of people called the Sons of the Soil and, of course, the Outsiders, and that occurs around Sao Paulo. Of course, there is reform and reorganization in British America during this time as well. So in the late 1600s, we see that the British Crown tries to take greater control of smuggling, colonial trading, and of manufacturing in the colonies. And so they pass a series of navigation acts which are supposed to limit who the colonists can trade with. Of course, they don't take this very well. Because they aren't following these navigation acts, the British Crown suspends the elected assemblies of New England colonies, which sounds like a way to get control, but is also a way to make colonists very upset. Anyways, colonists resist. They overthrow the governors of New York and Massachusetts. They remove the Catholic proprietor of Maryland, basically everybody they saw who was friendly to the Crown. And, of course, this sets the stage for our future confrontational politics in the 1700s between Britain and the American colonies, or the British colonies in America, which will lead to, of course, the American Revolution. Of course, during the 1700s, we do see economic growth and new immigration. This leads to an increase in the growth of cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and a more stratified social structure, especially in the middle and northern colonies, where we did not see the same social structure develop like we did in the southern colonies. Anyways, that's it, guys. So go back through this if you need anything a second time. Feel free to ask me questions, shoot me an email. But this wraps it up. We had to do a few with videos to get us done with this unit, or with this section of our unit before your midterm exam. So make sure you get this in your notes and come ready to review tomorrow. Have a good day.